The wallet was thin. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. Thin, worn at the corners, the leather the colour of old bark after years of being carried in the same back pocket by the same person. It sat on the sidewalk outside the Crestfield Tower lobby like something the city had simply exhaled. Snow had just begun to fall, the fine, dry kind that doesn't commit to anything, and the wallet lay in the middle of the salted concrete with no one near it and no one coming. A cab moved through the intersection at the far end of the block. A woman in a long coat walked past without slowing. Marcus stood on the sidewalk with his cardboard box held in both arms and his employee badge still clipped to the outside pocket of his coat, still because nobody had asked for it back yet. He had worn that badge for 11 years. He had been told at 4:47 in the afternoon on the 24th of December that his position had been eliminated and that his building access would expire at midnight. The wallet stared up at him from the salted concrete. Marcus looked down at it for a long moment, then he shifted the box to one arm, bent carefully at the knees and picked it up. He had no idea whose life he was holding. That is where this story begins, not with the loss, though the loss was real and the timing of it was the kind of thing a person does not quickly forgive, but with the wallet, with the choosing to pick it up. With the 11 seconds, Marcus stood in the cold before he tucked it inside his coat and started walking toward the parking structure 2 blocks north, because the thing in his chest that told him what to do had been telling him the same thing for 42 years and had never yet led him wrong, especially on the days it cost him. If you have ever watched someone you love do the right thing when doing the right thing got them nothing at all, you already understand this story. Stay close. Marcus Cole was 42 years old. He had worked in the facilities management division at Crestfield Financial Group since he was 31, which meant he had outlasted 3 building managers, 2 departmental restructurings, and 1 company-wide rebranding that turned the lobby carpet from burgundy to charcoal grey and cost more than his salary for the year. He was not the kind of man who talked about himself at work. He was the kind of man who noticed that the HVAC filter on the 14th floor had been running 2 weeks past replacement and quietly changed it without filing a work order, because the work order would take longer than the changing, and the air in that hallway had been telling him what the gauge was going to say for a week before he looked at the gauge. He was the kind of man who brought a thermos of coffee on overnight maintenance calls and left the extra cup on the desk of whoever was working dispatch, not because he expected anything back, but because dispatch was a cold and mostly thankless post, and the person in it deserved something warm at 3 in the morning. His supervisor for the last 4 of those years had been a woman named Paulette, who had been with Crestfield 23 years herself and who was let go the same afternoon at 4:15, 32 minutes before him. She had once written in his annual review that Marcus Cole was the reason the building ran the way it ran, which was quietly and well. They had both sat awkward with a compliment between them in the conference room on the 9th floor, the particular awkwardness of people who work well together and are sometimes uncomfortable when someone says so out loud. He had thanked her and meant it. She had waved him off and changed the subject to the boiler on sub-level 2, which had been running 2 degrees warm and which she felt someone should look at before the holidays. His daughter Bria was 9 years old. She had her father's patience and her late mother's laugh, the kind that started small and quiet and then took the whole room without asking. His wife Denise had passed 3 years earlier, a diagnosis that came fast and a decline that came faster, and Marcus had spent those 3 years in the particular silence of a man who keeps moving because the alternative is to stop and stopping. For now was not something he could let himself do. He and Bria lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked most of the time, in a neighbourhood the city kept talking about investing in. He paid the rent on the 1st of every month and kept the lights on and the refrigerator stocked. He took Bria to her Saturday reading program at the library 3 blocks from their building and her Tuesday soccer practice at the rec centre, and he helped her with her multiplication tables at the kitchen table after dinner, with the patient repetition of a man who understood that a thing worth knowing was worth knowing until you knew it in your bones. On the nights when the quiet got too large, when the apartment felt like a held breath, and the space where Denise had been was its own kind of presence, he sat on the couch with a glass of water and the television low, and he waited for morning, which always came. He had $314 in his checking account the afternoon they let him go. The severance was 8 weeks of base pay and a form to sign releasing the company from further obligation, which he had folded without finishing and placed in the cardboard box between his thermos and the small framed photograph of Bria at 6 that had lived on his work desk since she turned 6. He had a small Christmas tree on the kitchen counter at home, a 2-foot plastic one that Bria had decorated the first week of December with paper ornaments she cut and folded herself at the kitchen table, her tongue between her teeth, methodical and pleased with herself. She had asked in October if they could get a real tree this year, a big one like the one at the library they stood in front of every Saturday in December. Maybe had slowly become, probably not as the month moved. Probably not had become the plastic tree on the counter with the paper ornaments, which Bria had accepted without complaint because she was, in the deepest part of her father's daughter. The wallet sat against his chest inside his coat the whole 2 blocks to the parking structure, and he felt its weight with each step. In the car, he set the box on the passenger seat and opened the wallet flat on the steering wheel in the pale yellow light of the parking structure ceiling. Driver's license behind a plastic window, the small photograph showing a man in his mid to late 50s, silver at the temples, looking at the camera with the level expression of a person accustomed to being looked at. A black credit card, the heavy, dense kind that has weight to it, a corporate membership card for a building in the financial district, the name printed in small, serious letters, Raymond Stokes. $320 in cash, folded in half and then in half again, crisp. A photograph tucked behind a cloudy plastic sleeve, a woman and a boy. The boy somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, both of them squinting into bright summer lights somewhere near a lake, a dock visible at the edge, the boy laughing at something outside the frame. Marcus sat with the wallet spread on the steering wheel for a long time. The parking structure was dim and cold. 3 spaces to his left, a woman loaded bags into a trunk. The snow outside the open side of the structure had thickened a little. The dashboard clock read 5:12 in small green numbers. There was no phone number in the wallet. There was an address on the driver's license, a street in the north part of the city that Marcus associated with long driveways and houses that had been cleaned and repointed, and 2 cars in the garage rather than one on the street. He looked at the address. He looked at the cash, $320 folded neatly, which was $6 more than he had left in checking. He looked at the photograph of the boy laughing in the summer light. Then he started the car and drove north. He had not planned to drive north. His plan, such as it was, had been to sit in his own building's parking lot for a few minutes before going upstairs, those 10 or 15 minutes in the car that he sometimes needed on hard evenings before he became, fully and without reservation, Bria's father. He needed that seam between what his face had been doing all day and what it needed to do at the kitchen table. But the address was 40 minutes north in light Christmas Eve traffic, and the clock said 5:12, and the photograph was there in his hand, and he went. The drive took 43 minutes. The highway was thin at this hour, most people already where they were going. Marcus drove with the wallet in his inside pocket and the box on the seat, and the radio turned to a station playing the kind of Christmas music that stays quietly in the background. He thought about Paulette, who had texted him at 5:30 to say she was going to be fine, and she hoped he was too, which was the kind of message that means the person sending it is telling themselves the same thing. He thought about the form in the box. He hadn't finished reading. He thought about Bria's face when he came through the door each evening, the way it changed shape when she saw him, fast and complete, like watching a room light up, and he thought carefully about what he was going to say to her. The neighbourhood was what he had expected. Streetlights on before dark, Christmas lights in understated white rows along roof lines and porch rails, rather than the bright, generous mixed-colour strands his block favoured, the ones Bria pointed to on their walks home from soccer practice. A stillness in the streets that came from having nothing to worry about. He found the address and pulled to the curb in front of a large brick house, dark on the ground floor, warmly lit on the second, curtains visible in the windows, a black car in the driveway with a thin coat of snow across its hood. He sat in the car for a moment, then took the wallet and got out into the cold. The man who answered the door was shorter than Marcus had pictured from the name, which was not a rational thing, but expectations rarely are. Raymond Stokes was 58 or 60, silver at the temples as the license had suggested, dressed in a dark sweater and slacks as though he had recently come from somewhere or was shortly about to go. He looked at Marcus the way certain men of his standing had learned to look at strangers who appeared at their door on winter evenings, quickly, without warmth, measuring the situation before committing to being in it. "Can I help you?" he said. Not quite a question. Marcus held out the wallet. Raymond Stokes looked at it the way you look at something you had given up. Something unlocked in his face for a moment, and then closed again. He took the wallet with both hands and checked it with the brisk, thorough efficiency of a man who checks things for a living, rifling each compartment, glancing at the credit card, pressing his thumb across the folded cash. "Where did you find it?" he said. "Outside the Crestfield Tower on 7th, the side entrance on the sidewalk." Raymond looked up. "You work there?" "I did," Marcus said, "until today." There was a pause. The snow fell evenly on the step between them. Down the block a dog barked twice and went quiet. "Everything's there," Marcus said. "Cards, cash. I didn't take anything out." Raymond Stokes looked at him again, longer this time, with the closed quality gone, replaced by something he was still catching up to. He put the wallet in his pocket. Then his hand went to the other pocket and produced 2 folded bills and held them out, the gesture immediate and reflexive, the solution a man reaches for when he has solved problems this way before. Marcus shook his head. "That's all right." "It's Christmas Eve," Raymond said. Not as an argument, as an observation addressed as much to himself as to Marcus. "I know it," Marcus said. "Merry Christmas to you and yours." He turned and walked back down the front path to his car. He did not look back. He had not given Raymond Stokes his name, and Raymond Stokes had not asked for it. The snow came down on the driveway and the roof of the black car and the roof of Marcus's car with equal indifference. The same snow on both. Marcus drove home with the cardboard box on the seat beside him, the framed photograph of Bria visible above the edge of the box, and the inside pocket of his coat empty now where the wallet had been. He didn't know that Raymond Stokes had watched him walk to his car and then stood in the open doorway in the cold for almost 3 minutes, watching the taillights diminish in the falling snow before going inside and sitting down and picking up his phone and calling his chief of staff, Angela Park, at her home on Christmas Eve and saying, "I need you to find out who was laid off at the Crestfield 7th Street property today. Facilities management. I need the names." What Marcus also did not know was that Raymond Stokes owned Crestfield Financial Group, not managed it, not chaired a committee overseeing it, owned it outright through a parent holding company whose name appeared nowhere on the signage or the breakroom organisational charts or the employee handbooks or the laminated directory boards in the lobby that Marcus had dusted and straightened and occasionally replaced for 11 years. Stokes Capital owned Crestfield the way it owned 11 other commercial properties across 4 cities, as one line in a portfolio the financial press tracked in quarterly summaries Marcus had never had occasion to read. Raymond Stokes's name did not appear in the Crestfield Tower lobby or on any surface a facilities employee would encounter. His connection to the building was the kind that existed in acquisition records and ownership filings, visible to attorneys and accountants, but not to the man who maintained the building, who changed the filters and read the pressure gauges and left the extra cup on the dispatch desk at 3 in the morning. He had been at the 7th Street Tower that afternoon for an end-of-year budget review with the managing director, a meeting that had run long and gone badly, during which certain decisions had been presented to him for sign-off that he had not been fully briefed on until the papers were in front of him. Those decisions included the elimination of 11 positions in the facilities group. He had signed off and left in the private-controlled anger of a man who had been in consequential rooms for 3 decades and expected to know what he was signing before he signed it. His driver had pulled into traffic and he had not discovered the wallet's absence until 6 blocks away. He had not reported the loss because the cards could be cancelled and the cash could be replaced, but the photograph could not. And the thought of the photograph gone had settled in him with a cold, specific weight. Marcus had known none of this. He had simply known the wallet was thin and worn, and someone had dropped it on Christmas Eve, and he was the one standing in front of it. He stopped at the corner grocery on the way home. He bought a rotisserie chicken still warm under its plastic dome, and a box of macaroni and a small carton of eggnog that Bria had been mentioning since the week before Thanksgiving, bringing it up in the mild, persistent way she had of naming things she wanted without quite asking. He stood in the checkout line watching the total tick up on the small screen and paid with the card he had checked in the car and knew would clear, and carried everything upstairs in 2 bags. Bria was in the living room with her Aunt Cheryl, Marcus's younger sister, in the middle of a card game with improvised rules, which was the only kind Cheryl played with her. They both looked up when Marcus came through the door. Bria said, "Daddy, what's in the box?" With the bright, undeflectable curiosity she brought to most things, Marcus said, "Work stuff." Cheryl looked at the box, and then at Marcus, and read his face the way she had been reading it since they were children, and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. They ate the chicken and the macaroni at the kitchen table, Bria narrating the card game's rule structure in detail, and Marcus asking clarifying questions and receiving increasingly complicated answers. After dinner, he poured the eggnog into her favourite cup, and the look on her face when she saw it was worth more than the evening had cost him. After Cheryl left and the dishes were done, he carried everything carefully to the edge of Bria's bed. He told her plainly, the way he told her most things. The job at the building had ended that afternoon. It had not been anything he did wrong. These things happened to good workers at good companies, and it would not happen to him twice. They had savings, and he would find something new after the new year, and tomorrow was still Christmas, and nothing about tomorrow was different. Bria listened with her hands folded in her lap, and her mother's eyes on his face, the careful eyes that were not easily reassured by words alone, and required the thing behind the words. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, sitting with it, and then she said, "Did you do something wrong?" Marcus said, "No, baby, I promise you I didn't." She thought about this with the full seriousness she brought to things that mattered to her. Then she said, "Okay." And she said it slowly, arriving at it the way she arrived at conclusions, fully and without going back. She lay down, and he pulled the blanket up, and she said, "The chicken was really good." And Marcus said, "Yeah, it was." And she closed her eyes. He sat beside her until her breathing smoothed out into sleep. Then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter with the last of the eggnog in his glass, looking at the plastic tree with its paper ornaments. The tree was 2 feet tall and sat in the corner of the counter next to the bread box. The ornaments were red and green and yellow, cut into stars and circles, and one that was meant to be a reindeer, Bria's name written on the back of each one in careful pencil. They turned slowly in the heat from the vent, tiny slow rotations, Bria's handwriting on each one. He finished the eggnog. He washed the glass. He turned off the light and went to bed, and lay in the dark a while thinking about Denise, which he did most nights, and about the 11 years in that building, and about Bria saying okay with her mother's eyes, and then he was asleep. The call came at 8:47 on the morning of the 26th. Marcus was at the kitchen table with Bria's cereal bowl still in front of him, and his coffee gone cold, and his phone open to the job listings he had bookmarked the night before. Facilities coordinator positions, building services, supervisors, operations manager roles, the ones he was overqualified for and would take without complaint and do thoroughly and well. "Is this Marcus Cole?" the voice said. A woman's voice, unhurried and organised, the voice of someone who managed things by habit. "It is," Marcus said. "My name is Angela Park. I'm the Chief of Staff to Raymond Stokes at Stokes Capital. Mr. Stokes asked me to reach out this morning." A brief pause, not uncomfortable. "He mentioned that you returned something to him on Christmas Eve." Marcus set his coffee cup down. "I remember," he said. "He'd like to meet with you at your convenience this week, if you're willing. Thursday morning. Would that work?" In the other room, he could hear Bria moving around, her footsteps on the floor, the small sounds of her getting ready, and he thought for a moment about the listings on the screen in front of him and about the form in the cardboard box that he had finally finished reading the day before. "Thursday works," he said. He did not ask what the meeting was about. He wrote down the address Angela Park gave him on the back of an envelope from the recycling pile and thanked her and ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone face down on the table. He told Cheryl that evening when she came by to return a pan she had borrowed. She sat across from him at the kitchen table while Bria watched something in the other room, and he told her about the wallet and the Christmas Eve drive and the call from Angela Park. The whole of it. Cheryl listened with her arms crossed and her head at the angle it went when she was deciding how much hope to allow herself. When he was done, she said, "Don't get big about it." He said he wasn't, she said. "Marcus?" He said he knew. She uncrossed her arms. "Who is he?" Marcus looked up Raymond Stokes on his phone, right there at the table, and they read the results together in the quiet that followed. Stokes Capital. Commercial real estate and development. 6 cities. A portfolio covering office towers, mixed-use retail, commercial development. Net worth estimated in the range of $900 million. Cheryl stared at the screen without speaking for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, 11 years you were taking care of his building." Marcus said, "I didn't know it was his building." She said, "Nobody knew." They sat with that. Then Cheryl said, "You could have kept the cash." And Marcus said, "I know." And she said, 3:20, home in 15 minutes. And Marcus said, I know, Cheryl. And she looked at him for a long moment and looked away, something working in her jaw. You are exactly like Mama was, she said. It is going to be the death of me. He laughed, a short, real one, the first since the 24th, and she shook her head at him like she always had. He wore the dark blue shirt and the grey slacks Thursday. He drove to the financial district, found the pale granite tower near the park that Angela Park had described, went up to the 31st floor and waited in a conference room with a south-facing window that showed him the whole city laid out from the bridge to the bay, the city he had grown up in and worked in and raised his daughter in, the city he had maintained one building of for 11 years, the city that had its indifferences and its graces and its long memory. Raymond Stokes came in without ceremony, 2 minutes after Marcus sat down. He set a coffee cup on the table and took the chair directly across and looked at Marcus with the same looking as the doorway on Christmas Eve, but without the closed quality. This was the look of a man who had already done his assessment and was now attending to what he had found. I pulled the records from Crestfield, he said. 11 people in facilities, including you. Budget decisions made below my level without my full visibility, I have addressed that. He held Marcus's gaze. 11 years, he said. Yes, Marcus said. I've spoken with Paulette Graves and with 2 others from your division, a woman named Sandra and a man named Trevor. He said this without narrating how quickly he had found them, because men like Raymond Stokes did not explain the machinery of their operations. They described you the same way. Marcus waited. I want to ask you directly, Raymond said. You didn't know who I was when you came to the door. I knew your name from the license. I didn't know about Crestfield until my sister looked you up 2 days ago. I tried to give you money. I saw that. Why didn't you take it? Marcus thought about how to say this right. Because I didn't drive up there for money. The wallet wasn't mine to keep, and the return wasn't mine to be paid for. That was just what it was. Something moved in Raymond Stokes's face. It was small and real, the particular shift a face makes when it has been holding a question and has received the only answer that would satisfy it. He nodded once. They talked for 50 minutes. Raymond asked about the work at Crestfield in specific technical terms, the building systems, the maintenance cycles, the challenges of managing a commercial property across shifts and seasons, and Marcus answered him fully and without inflation, the same way he had answered Paulette's annual review questions for years. Near the end, Raymond said, I have a properties division that manages 6 commercial buildings in this city. My operations director retired in October, and I have been looking since November for the right person. He paused. I'll have Angela send you the full description and the compensation range. Take a day and read it. He slid a simple white card across the table with a direct number on it. I want to be clear, this is not charity. You didn't ask for anything, and I am not offering anything based on sentiment. I spoke to 3 people who worked alongside you for years. The hire is based on that. He held Marcus's eyes. The wallet is separate. I am grateful for the wallet. But that is not what this is. Marcus picked up the card. I appreciate that, he said. I'll read the description. At the door, Raymond paused without turning around. The photograph in the wallet, he said. My son James, he's 23 now. He said nothing else. He left. Angela Park's email arrived at 6:18 that evening. Marcus sat at the kitchen table after Bria was asleep and read the full job description twice slowly, the way he read anything that mattered. Operations Director, 6 commercial buildings, 22 direct staff, oversight of maintenance protocols and vendor contracts and capital improvement planning and emergency response coordination. The salary range had a midpoint 2.5 times what he had made at Crestfield. He sat with the phone face down on the table and the apartment quiet around him and the kitchen light on and the plastic tree turning its paper ornaments in the heat from the vent. He thought about Denise. He let himself think about her fully and without managing it, the way you need to sometimes. He thought about her voice on a December evening years ago in this same kitchen, standing at the counter making tea, saying to him, Marcus, you're going to be all right, you know that. And him saying he knew it, and her saying, no, I mean it all the way, and him saying, so do I. He had meant it then. He meant it now in a different and deeper way, the way meaning settles into a person after years of testing, after the thing you believe has been tested against loss and time, and the particular weight of raising a child alone. And it holds, it keeps holding. He wrote 2 sentences to Angela Park. He said he had read everything carefully and wanted to accept, and he thanked her. He sent it. He started in February on a Monday morning in an office on the 28th floor with windows facing west and a view of the part of the city he had come from, the neighbourhood where his building sat, the park where he took Bria on Saturdays. The work suited him with the precision that good work suits the right person, asking of him exactly what he had to give and returning it in kind. He took the 6 buildings the way he had taken every building he had ever been responsible for, as systems to be known rather than managed from a distance, to be walked through and listened to, the way you listen to a building to understand what it is telling you about itself. He met his 22 staff one at a time in the first week and learned each person's name and the particular knowledge they carried and the way they thought about problems, because a team is its own kind of system, and you have to understand a system before you can run it right. He kept a yellow legal pad on his desk. He brought good coffee to early meetings. He returned emails the same day they arrived. He fixed what could be fixed and reported clearly and specifically on what needed resources beyond his immediate reach. And Raymond Stokes, reading those reports, found them to be the reports of a man who knew the difference between a problem and a situation, and knew which required action and which required patience, a distinction that is harder to maintain than it sounds, and that most people, given enough time and enough pressure, eventually stop making. In April, at the end of a quarterly review, Raymond looked around the table at the numbers on the screen and said, "This is what a well-run division looks like," and looked briefly at Marcus. Marcus nodded and wrote down the one item that still needed resolution and closed his notebook. That was how they worked together. It was the right arrangement for both of them. He got the real tree that Christmas. He and Bria drove to the lot on the avenue the Saturday after Thanksgiving. The lot that's set up every year with rows of Douglas firs and Scotch pines roped under work lights, and they walked the rows in the cold with their hands in their pockets and their breath visible in the air until Bria stopped in front of a 7-foot Douglas fir near the back of the lot and said, "That one," with the quiet certainty she brought to things she was sure of. It was full and straight and fragrant, the kind of tree that drops needles on the floor for 3 weeks and fills the whole apartment with the smell of a forest. Marcus paid for it and carried it up the 4 flights and wrestled it into the stand in the corner of the living room. And when he stood it upright and stepped back and Bria saw it in the apartment, she went very still, her hands at her sides, looking at it with an expression Marcus had not seen on her face before, a fullness that was on the edge of something. Then she turned around and said, "Mama would have loved it." Marcus said, "Yeah, she would have." They stood together with that thought, which was not a grief thought in the old acute hollowing way, but a warmer thing, a thought that carried her forward into the room with them rather than placing her behind a door, the kind of thought you can live inside. They hung the paper ornaments on the real tree, the ones from the years before, and the new ones Bria had made that fall, cut from the same construction paper with the same careful scissor work, her name in pencil on the back of each. They hung them among the branches with the few other decorations they had, and stood back and looked, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because the tree with its paper ornaments in the apartment light was exactly right, the handmade among the real, slightly imperfect, thoroughly cared for. The worn wallet sat on the small shelf by Marcus's front door, where he had placed it the night he drove back from Raymond Stokes's house, and somehow never moved. Not that wallet. His own, the one Denise had given him the Christmas after they married, brown and soft now from years of use, worn at the corners the way everything is worn by long, faithful use. He touched it each morning on the way out the door, the way you touch certain things not for luck but for continuity. The quiet confirmation that you are the same person you were, the person who bent down on a cold December sidewalk with a cardboard box in his arms and picked up something that wasn't his because that was simply who he was. The year Bria turned 12, she asked him to tell her the whole story, start to finish, because she was old enough now to want all of it. He told her straight through at the kitchen table one December evening, from the sidewalk to the parking structure to the drive north to the conference room on the 31st floor, and she listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she was quiet a moment and then said, "Were you scared when you drove up there?" He thought about it honestly. "Not scared," he said. "I didn't know enough to be scared. I just knew the wallet wasn't mine to keep." She said, "But you knew it had cash in it." He said, "I did." She said, "And you just lost your job." He said, "That's right." She looked at him with the full attention she had from her mother, the kind that doesn't let you be approximate. "So How did you know to do it? She said. Marcus thought about this for a long time, longer than the question probably required. He thought about his mother, who had worked 30 years as a home health aide and brought the same full attention to every person in her care, whether anyone was watching or not. He thought about his father, who fixed people's cars for 4 decades in a neighborhood garage and never sent anyone home with a lie about what their car needed or didn't need. He thought about Denise, who did kindness with the offhandedness of breathing. He thought about all the small, unremarkable moments in 11 years of work when the right thing was the quiet thing, and the quiet thing was the only thing. I didn't think of it as knowing, he said. I thought of it as who I was. You don't decide who you are in the hard moment. You decide a long time before, and then when the hard moment comes, you just do what you already decided. Bria held this carefully, the way she held things she was going to keep. Then she reached over and took his hand the way she had when she was small, and they crossed a street and held it for a moment and let go. Outside the window, the city was lit with December light, the particular familiar light of a city in winter that Marcus had known his whole life, and across the room the tree stood in its corner with the paper ornaments turning slowly in the warm air, the old and the new together, and the apartment held the smell of it, deep and green and real. The world keeps a longer ledger than any one person can read. That is not a promise about outcome. It is a description of how things move over time, how acts of integrity accumulate in ways that are not visible at the moment and cannot be predicted and cannot be demanded and cannot be performed for the camera. You either are the person who stops or you are not. Marcus Cole was the person who stops. He had been that person long before Christmas Eve and the salted sidewalk and the thin, worn wallet. He had been that person at the kitchen table with his daughter's multiplication tables, at a workbench at 2 a.m. when the system needed tending, at a hospital bedside in the particular quiet of letting someone go. He had been that person every morning for 42 years in the ordinary, unremarkable practice of doing right by whatever was in front of him. That it paid out and paid out in the specific and generous way it did was the kind of thing that makes people say the world is just. Marcus would have said something quieter. He would have said he was lucky and that the luck was mostly in the people he had come from and that Bria had those people in her now too, and that was the thing that mattered most when he thought about the years still ahead of them. Kindness given quietly is not lost. The world is not always watching. But it keeps a record longer than any one person can hold in their hands, and sometimes the record comes back to you in a form you didn't expect, at a moment you needed it most. Marcus Cole had not needed to know any of that to do what he did on Christmas Eve. He had simply been standing on the sidewalk in the cold with his cardboard box and a badge that would expire at midnight, and there was a wallet on the concrete in front of him, and it was his to pick up. He stopped. That was enough. That was always going to be enough. And on quiet evenings in the warm apartment with his daughter nearby and the city going on outside the window and the worn wallet on the shelf by the door where it always was, Marcus Cole knew this to be true in the way you know things that have stopped needing to be proved, that have simply become the ground you stand on. Have you ever done the right thing at the moment it cost you the most? Tell us in the comments, because those are the stories that stay with people. And if this one moved you, there is another story waiting for you right now about a woman who gave away the last thing she owned on the coldest night of the year and didn't find out what she had done until years later. It is worth your time. This is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events depicted are entirely fictitious.